Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/16 scale radio-controlled M26 Pershing. Now, the model in this video here is built for commission and belongs to a private collector. As I often mention in these build videos, I often take on build commissions from models ranging from 1/35 scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. Now, this build here did receive quite an extensive detail upgrade, all of which will be discussed in this video, so stay tuned. Before we go on with the video, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around the model. This vehicle here is that of an M26 Pershing. More specifically, this model is built to represent the actual production versions of the M26 Pershing family, as opposed to the T26E3, which is commonly found in model kits in 1/16 scale. The main difference between the T26E3 and the M26 Pershing is that the T26E3 is still an experimental vehicle and was not yet adopted by the US military. Thus, the T designation in front of its name, which is an abbreviation for test. When the vehicle gets adopted by the military, it receives an M designation. By the time the Pershing family actually was fielded and saw combat towards the tail end of World War II, the vehicle was still in its final testing phase and was not officially adopted by the US military yet. Shortly after these tanks were fielded, a few problems with the tank's design became apparent. This is common specifically with newly developed military vehicles, which are still in their final testing and evaluation phase. These problems were all corrected, and by the time these corrections actually made it through the production line, the vehicle was already fully and officially adopted by the US military as the M26 Pershing. These improvements are subtle, however, are important to distinguish between the two types of vehicles, which I will be going over more as the video goes on. The M26 Pershing was not in production for a really long period of time. They were produced from 1945, and production ceased in the early 1950s. Somewhere along the mid of the production range, the design was improved, and these tanks with these improvements got the A1 designation. As for the M26 Pershing itself, technically it still has many of the same features found on the earlier T26E3s. This would include the same final drive system, as well as the same GAF Ford V8 gasoline engine for the power pack, the same gearbox, and also the same type of armament, which would be the 90mm main gun, as well as two M19-19A4 machine guns, one in the bow and the other in the coaxial position in the turret. Of course, being an American tank, for the anti-aircraft role, it was mounted with an M2 HB 50 caliber machine gun. When these vehicles first came out, they were a huge departure compared to the legacy vehicles of the Sherman, the Lee, as well as even the Stuarts. In addition to having not only better armor, but better armament, the vehicles also were torsion bar equipped. This is also vastly different compared to the volute spring system, which was found on the legacy vehicles. The Pershing's suspension design basically stayed unchanged and was used throughout the future American tank designs, all the way through the Patton and M60 families, until only when the Abrams came out, the design was changed. However, there are still some design cues which are found on the Abrams, which can be traced all the way back to the M26 family. Now, several of the actual production M26 Pershings actually participated in combat towards the very tail end of World War II. However, the majority of the Pershing's use in actual combat came within the Korean conflict. To counter the Russian T-34-85, which was being used by the communists, the US military needed to find any medium and heavy tanks which were stored in military depots throughout the Pacific. Specifically for the Pershing, a large number of M26 Pershings were stored on the island of Okinawa in order for the preparations at the time for the mainland invasion of Japan. However, with the drop of the atomic bombs, these vehicles were not deployed to mainland Japan and were on hand, ready to go in 1950 in order for the Korean conflict. Once they entered into the theater, these vehicles were very capable at dealing with the T-34-85s, and with the entrance of these as well as the M4A3E8 Shermans, the threat of the T-34 diminished very quickly. Shortly after the signing of the armistice in Korea, the design for the M26 Pershing was beginning to show its limitations. The M26, along with the M26A1, were relegated to National Guard and Army Reserve units, while the forefront had the M46 Patton, as well as the newly fielded M47. These vehicles would hold the line up until the new generation of American tanks would come out, namely that of the M48. Before we continue with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplied you with. And here's the model just before the start of the project. For the base starter kit, I will be utilizing this 1/16 scale radio-controlled M26 Pershing for the base. The 1/16 M26 Pershing is one of Heng oldest production kits in 1/16. Also around the same age and released around the same time was that of the 1/16 Tiger 1. What was unique about the Heng is that Heng really rejuvenated the 1/16 scale. For the longest time, 1/16 was a bit of a dead end, and the only company making kits was Tamiya. The Tamiya kits were very beautifully engineered. However, the problem with the Tamiya kits was their range in kit selection was very limited, and the costs were a lot more substantial compared to something along these lines. What Heng went ahead and did was they went ahead and took the Tamiya Tiger 1 and the Tamiya Pershing and copied the tooling to make these kits here not only ready to run radio controlled, but also release them at a much more affordable price. Back when the first generation Heng Tiger and Pershing came out, they retailed for about 60 to about 70 US dollars. Since then, Heng has made lots of improvements to the base starter kit on both the Pershing and the Tiger, and the new versions here cost a little bit more. However, they give you a lot more features compared to the first rendition. The first renditions utilized a standard gigahertz radio and did not even have proportional drive. It was just on or off. Matter of fact, I recently did a conversion to a first generation Heng Tiger 1, and that video can be found on my video listings. In addition to not having a proportional drive steering, the original Heng also did not have sound as well as smoke. They did have a rotating turret, elevating gun, and the airsoft firing capability. They also always had head and tail lights. Back when Heng released these models for the first time, they really stumbled into a very large and untapped market, as there's a huge demand for radio-controlled 1/16 scale tanks. However, what Heng did was, with the way they marked it down, they made it more accessible to a larger population of the market. With the price being what they were, a lot more collectors got into the 1/16 RC tank market, and this then opened up areas for aftermarket suppliers to come in to offer hop-up parts to bring these models to the next level, as the tooling on them is a little bit on the soft side in certain areas. Even though the components are tooled and copied from the Tamiya kits, the Heng models have been modified and changed in a way that the two parts are not interchangeable. Such things as you cannot take the Heng turret and mount it directly onto the Tamiya and expect everything to work. They operate on two separate systems. In addition to the aftermarket parts being made open and more available on the market, the other companies followed suit with Heng. This is when companies like Tegan as well as Matoro followed shortly after with their own renditions and their own kits. So the Heng Pershing and Tiger are really, really important milestones for vehicles in this scale. As for the model you see here, this is, I believe, the current or the most recent rendition of the M26 made by Heng. What this means is that this model here does have a lot more of improvements in functions and electronics compared to the earlier generations. This model here does have a 2.4 gigahertz radio. It does have smoke, sound, as well as a proportional drive steering. Also, as you can quickly see, the box's graphic design is a lot more improved compared to the white box versions, which are found all over eBay and on the marketplace. The model does have it has this nice matte black finish with a nice illustration of the M26 Pershing with Tamiya-esque style typography and layout. This panel here shows some of the options that are available. Now this model here is the all plastic version and does not have any of the metal components, which are discussed as options. On the back panel you have a quick little diagram of the tank with some brief history as well as some typical stock photography of the M26 Pershing, which are found all over the internet. Close up of the radio with its functions, as well as other information. Ironically, the box and the graphic design and presentation is pure showmanship and is actually a hell of a lot better than the starter kit on the inside, which you'll see when I crack it open. Opening the model, it slides out of the box, which is typical for these Henlong kits. And here's the model in its styrofoam sarcophagus. First we have here is the smoke fluid. Like I said, this model here is smoke system equipped, and the smoke fluid is pretty much standard on all these models from Tegan as well as Henlong. Pulling out the model. Now directly beneath the model is a parts bag full of runners, and you don't want to pull it out and then have it drop on the floor on you. And here we have the bare bones M26, or more specifically a T26E3. For anyone who's built the Tamiya Pershing, you'll feel completely at home, as many of these components are Tamiya-esque. One complete carryover from the Tamiya that's interesting to point out is that of the secondary antenna base. On the Tamiya kit, the kit gives you one MP48 spring antenna, which would go in this location here, and this location here would be for the extended whip antenna. Keep in mind that the original M26 T26E3 Pershing came out back in 2003, in which there was no 2.4 gigahertz radios really on the market. And this little slot here would be for you to insert a large, long, L-shaped antenna, which would bolt to the inside of the turret right around here, and you would have the RX connect. And the slot would be for the antenna to wobble and move around. This component here is completely unnecessary and is actually incorrect for the Pershing, but it's a carryover from the Tamiya kit, and Henlong just left it in place. Now, some of the other mods that Henlong made was that, of course, the barrel. The thickness of the barrel is different from the Tamiya, as this one here needs to fire an airsoft BB gun. Also, the Henlong unit, the turret casting is totally smooth, as well as the mantlet, and is missing the fine cast texturing which is found on the Tamiya units. You also have a pretty substantial large LED in the optic over here. The point of the LED is to notify the user that the airsoft gun is firing. The tank also has LEDs for the headlights and taillights. This is something that has always been true on the models from Henlong. Now, one different that this version has from the original Henlong offering is that the original Henlong had the original antenna located in this location here, and you would have a stud like this one sticking out of the deck in which you would plug in your whip antenna. When Henlong upgraded to 2.4 gigahertz, this was dropped and the hole was deleted, which is literally one less thing I have to worry about when rebuilding this model. The tracks are plastic, as is the sprocket. Now, they do have a metal upgraded version in which you get metal running gear, namely that of metal sprocket, metal track, and metal gearbox. The reason why I opted for the plastic one is due for the track. The track that we have on this version here is literally the exact same track found on the metal version, just molded in plastic. The reason why the metal track is not worth it in my opinion is if you look at these track here, they have the inaccuracy of having these large holes found in the inner portion of the rubber pads. You also have small little injection marks found on this row of the track. These errors are present on the metal track, and it's just one less thing I have to worry about in order to replace it. However, you are paying extra for the metal track. So I just simply opted for the plastic version, saved the cost, and just opted for the better metal track that I'm going to show in an upcoming scene. The hatches are also molded in shut on this tank here and are not functional, unlike the Tamiya one, which these are functional in order to get access to the takedown fasteners as well as the power switch. The model is powered by a single 7.2 battery, which is located under this hatch here, and this is also very different from the Tamiya offering. It has a single on and off switch, and this is one it changed from the original Heng Long. Original Heng Long had another slot located in the bottom of the hull to switch between 3 different frequencies of the crystal in order for you to drive the tank with other tanks around. This switchable frequency setup was a bit of a pain and didn't really work all that well. And once Heng Long switched over to the 2.4 gigahertz, that feature was thankfully dropped. Moving further, takes us to the runners. These runners that you see here is just some extra fittings for that of the hubcaps, as well as the tow cable and other smaller fittings for the tank. You have a set of markings which are basically nothing more than stickers, but needless to say these stickers will not be utilized for this build. In this box here, this is typical for Heng Long, you have the rest of the required runners to build the model, which things features such as the grab handles, some helmets, as well as even the M250 caliber machine gun, which is found in this runner tray here. Since the tank is airsoft equipped, you have a box full of 6mm BBs, which is quite standard. You have the 2.4 gigahertz radio. Now this radio is not the same type of version which is found on my Sherman Pershing hybrid build, which I recently did, in which that version had 2 little buttons up here which fired the machine gun and the main gun. This vehicle here features a more traditional Heng Long system in which this function here does all the turret functions, including firing the gun and raising and elevating it. Needless to say though, the radio does have proportional drive steering, which is a nice plus, and these radios are pretty decent for a base starter model like you see here. They're powered with a row of AA batteries, and these radios are pretty effective at their job in my opinion. Finally supplied with the model is that of a 7.2 battery and the recharger. 7.2 battery you see here is what's supplied with more of the recent Heng Long kits, and it is actually a lithium-ion battery. You have your own special charger with a matching plug in order to charge this battery. This lead here is what powers the tank, and this one here is your recharger. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that you cannot use just a standard RC NiCad battery charger to charge this, as you can both damage possibly the battery as well as even the recharger. So use the charger that comes with the battery for the tank and keep it close by at all times. Another thing to point out is that the paint on the model is very basic. There's no added airbrush weathering or anything along those lines. In fact, the olive drab is not even put on in all that thorough of a manner. As you can see, there's some plastic showing through in certain locations. For the purposes of the build that I'm going to be using this for, this is absolutely not necessary, as the whole tank is going to be rebuilt, repainted, and primed anyways. As for driving the tank, I'll be swapping out the plastic gearbox with that of a metal one. For the metal gearbox I would be utilizing, that would be this Heng Long Ultimate Edition 2 High Performance Gearbox. The gearbox was procured off of eBay and is very easy to find and is listed by various sellers. I've used one of these gearboxes in another build that I've done, and so far that model has been running pretty well. Before I crack open the box, one thing that is interesting to point out is probably a funny translation error, and that is over here written on the side. More specifically, in order to achieve faster speed gearbox, torque force is more powerful, and the advantages of wear resistance sex is stronger. I'm not quite sure what they mean by that, but I'll take it as is. The gearbox itself is packaged in very nicely. It's nice and protected. The quality so far appears to be that similar to the Tagen steel gearbox. However, the Tagen one seems to be a little bit better, and when I take the gears out, I'll show you what I mean. Here goes the gearbox. They come in with this reddish aluminum casing. They have ball bearings on them. Appear to have nice movement. The gears themselves are molded and casted, however appear to be a decent quality alloy for the application. The motor that you see on here is this blue color, and this motor here is a very high performance motor. So much so that if you watch the video that I did with the Sherman Pershing Hybrid, you'll see that it has a lot of pick up and go power. Currently on the fence, rather than that, I'll keep these motors or I'll swap them out with the stock motors just so I could slow the speed down just a little bit, just to keep things a little bit more accurate. However, that is subject to change, and I'll probably go into more detail on that as the video progresses. The gearboxes are a simple drop-in installation. No fitting is required. You remove the original gearbox, use the same fasteners. This guy just locks back in the mounts that are pre-molded in, and you just bolt it in place. The set also comes with the wires, which you use to plug into the leads and plug into the kit circuit board, and everything is plug and play and no soldering is required. It's a very simple installation and can be done in a matter of minutes. Moving on from the sex-resistant gearbox takes us to the track and the sprocket. Like I said before, I opted for the plastic version as the ones that come with the metal tracks are not as good as the aftermarket tracks which are on the market. The aftermarket tracks are from Matto, and this was also procured from eBay as well. It's very common to find on other online sources, namely also AliExpress. The tracks themselves are very nicely done, and in fact are arguably a lot better than the ones found on the Tamiya tank itself. If you notice, the inside portions do not have those hollow wells which are found on the tank itself, and it's also missing the injector pin. What's also interesting to point out is that the first generation Snow Leopard, which was released by Heng back in 2006, actually had some pretty decent tracks. Tracks on those were not the same ones you see here and were made out of a little bit better plastic, and also had the wells solid as well as the no injector pins found on the track. What more than likely happened was that this was done to alleviate as a cost-cutting measure, and plus they figured that pretty much everybody that builds these tanks swaps out for aftermarket tracks anyway. So they went ahead and gave you the watered-down plastic tracks that you have here. Now, if anyone's wondering, even though these tracks are technically the watered-down ones, the tank does still run pretty well with the stock track. So if you're buying this tank to keep as a beater and to run around and just use it, the plastic tracks should serve you pretty well. Back to the Matto tracks. Another nice feature on these tracks is the color that they are. They're this nice dull oxide coloring, which is perfect for the tracks. So much so I'm probably not going to paint the exterior portions of them, as they match very well with the real Parkerized units which are found on the real tanks. As for the metal sprockets, the sprockets themselves are very high quality and are very closely similar to that of the Tamiya sprockets that are found on the Tamiya kit. They have very good detailing for them and assemble very easily and mount directly to the Heng spindles which are found on the sex-resistant gearbox.